So just before we go on to our final exercise of day 3, I want to give you a brief overview of what is going to be involved in day 4, which is around prototyping. If you're familiar with what a prototype is, feel free to skip this video. It's not essential for the sprint. But if you're a little bit unclear about what exactly a prototype is or why you need to make one, keep watching this video and we'll run through that. So firstly, the goal of a prototype is to create a quick and affordable way to test your proposed solution. So prototypes can take many different forms, but they should all be quick to build before you decide to test them. And they do not have to cover everything beyond the specific flow you are testing. So keep that in mind. You don't need to design a fully fledged app if you're working with a digital product. You're just looking to test the core flow of the product that you think will make or break that as an application. So why is prototyping important? There are lots of benefits to prototyping your solution. Prototyping is required for conducting user testing, and user testing is where you get the biggest benefits from the product design sprint. So in a little bit more detail, some of the other benefits of prototyping are that they're essential for testing. So as I said, building a prototype allows you to test your solution with real users, and that real user data and feedback will drive your decision making, resulting in a solution that really works for your customers rather than just one that you think will work. So it gives you that proof and that validation. A quick build means you can get results more quickly. So prototypes should be a lot faster to build than an actual solution. And because you can build that quickly, it allows you to get those results and user data more quickly. So this has knock-on benefits, like allowing you to get to market faster because you're confident in the knowledge that the solution you're going to build is the correct one and you won't need to take it back to make changes. Another benefit of prototyping is that they allow you to test a solution in a really low-risk environment or on a very small scale. So when early problems with your solution arise, they'll only affect a handful of customers. So it's not going to affect your whole customer base. The methodology around prototyping allows you to iterate your way to scale. So your first prototype will identify flaws in your solution, and that's natural. But because you're testing on a small scale to begin with, you can fix these issues before testing again with a bigger audience. And a bigger audience will probably reveal some new issues with your solution, which you can address next, and so on, until you reach a large scale audience. So prototypes allow you to iterate your way to that scale rather than trying to find a perfect solution before showing it to any users. So the perfect solutions with no customer feedback are extremely rare. So keep that in mind. Prototyping is really, really helpful for that. So how do we prototype our solution? It depends on your business, but if you are prototyping a digital solution, we would recommend using a tool, something like Figma. There's a couple of alternatives to this, but these tools allow you to build a clickable prototype. So when I say a clickable prototype, this is essentially a singular flow of designed screens that are linked together that you can then share with the user and they're able to click through them. And tomorrow we'll be seeing more examples of how they're built and you can see some sample output. But that's just to give you an idea of what will be involved with tomorrow. It's usually only one path or flow, and it doesn't have to be pixel perfect. It just needs to illustrate the idea and the user experience that your solution is going to have. If you are creating fictional scenarios or tasks, which again we'll be going into tomorrow, try to come up with ones that test the new or the core functionality. Just to give an example here, for a travel bucket, we're not going to need to test a login flow because login flows are common for most users. So there's no need to prototype that. We'll be prototyping some of the core functionality that we'll identify in the next exercise. If you're testing a non-digital solution, you can still create some prototypes. So there are many other ways to test an idea before committing resources to building that solution. So we've got a couple of scenarios here that you can try to think about and think of ways that you could test these. So in our first scenario, let's say a fish restaurant is thinking of bringing out a controversial mustard flavored sandwich, but they're unsure whether it'll be a success because of its pretty radical flavors. So how might we prototype and test this new flavor before committing lots of resources to it? If you're interested in trying this out, feel free to pause the video before I run through some of the answers. Okay, so a couple of different ways we could test this. You could use customer surveys to see if that's something that would interest people. You could use small batch taste tests, so give the sandwich to a couple of people and see what they think. One that I think McDonald's sometimes used was to place a large image of the sandwich behind the counter and mark the number of people who try to order it. So that's called a smoke screen. So it looks like the sandwich is real, but it isn't a reality yet. But that's a way of gauging demand or gauging interest. And you could do this similarly by putting up a Facebook ad or by putting up an ad on Instagram and see how many click-throughs you get. And you can do an online campaign, so sign up to be notified when it's available. That's another way of testing demand. Or you could release it for a limited time promotional run. So commit to making 100 of these sandwiches and gauge interest based on that. So you don't need to do a full wide-scale rollout. Or you could do all of the above or a combination of all of the above. So you can take multiple approaches to testing out this new flavored sandwich. In our second scenario, let's say hypothetically, a popular British pub chain, they're experiencing issues where the front counter servers can't hear team members in the kitchen due to the noise levels in the bars, and maybe they need to communicate, to let them know when a keg is empty or something like that. So they think that a messaging service between the front desk and the kitchen could be useful, but they're unsure if it would be used. So how might we test the demand for this before building a solution? Again, if you and your team want to have a go at coming up with a couple of ways to test this solution offline, feel free to pause the video now before I run through the solutions. Okay, so one thing to remember here is that when you're testing, you can do things that won't scale. So it's not the end solution, but it gives you real data quickly before building the solution you need. So try to think about that. That might be a clue for how you might go about this one. And secondly, you want to have a key metric that you want to observe in your test. So have that identified in advance so that you know if the test was a success or not. So in this scenario, what we might do is to write some messages on sticky notes, and then we'll collect each note and see how many were passed over and back at the end of each week. So those sticky notes will be handed from the front counter to the back counter staff. And at the end of the week, we can tally those up to see how many were sent. And just keep in mind that sometimes those paper or offline approaches are usually quick and really easy to test. They don't involve building any software. And so another way to run this would be to identify a test pub, so one of the pubs from this chain, and to provide walkie-talkies for fixed time to the staff in the front of the bar and in the back of the tower, and measure the KPIs that you identified before and after. So for example, does it decrease the number of dry kegs, or does it decrease the wait times for customers as a result of dry kegs? Something like that you've identified as the critical KPI. And after that fixed time is up, so once the experiment is done, ask the team members to provide feedback, and that can be done in an anonymous Google form, or it can just be a simple sit-down chat with some of the team to see how they thought the solution worked. And finally, in some really rare cases, it can be almost impossible to run a prototype. These are really, really rare, but in those cases, try to utilize early batch releases to get real user data before committing resources to a highly polished solution. So what that means is just try to release it on a small scale. If you have to build it, don't roll it out company-wide without having tested it with a smaller number of users first. So here are some tips to remember. Test in a controlled environment. So this allows you to make mistakes that can be fixed before a wide-scale rollout. So a controlled environment might mean a Figma test, like the one that we'll see tomorrow with Travel Bucket, or any other software product. Or like in our second scenario with the pub chain, for a non-digital test, or like in our second scenario with the pub chain, it might mean rolling out a solution in a single pub rather than rolling it out to all of their pubs in the chain for a non-digital test. So it's not advisable to roll something new out to all pubs or to all software users without testing it first to iron out those kinks. Another tip is to test on quiet days. So if you're doing a live in-person test or indeed updating any software, some things won't work the first time out. So to mitigate that risk, especially for your first test, try to run some tests at off-peak times or off-peak days and build up towards testing on a busy day, fixing issues and iterating as you scale up. So hopefully testing on quiet days will identify some of the issues that you're going to have, and you can fix those first before you move on to testing on a busier day where there's more risk involved. Another point is to have assistance ready if needed. So in a Figma test, you'll normally have a facilitator present to help out if testers get stuck. So this tip of having assistance ready is especially important if you're doing a live test in person, like in our pub example. So something might go wrong and customers could get confused. So it's a good idea not just to test on a quiet day, but to actually have a few extra team members on duty the day of the test to help customers who get stuck if they're running into issues. And finally, try to get feedback. So if customers do get stuck in that scenario, it could be a great learning opportunity. So have those additional staff trained to ask the kind of questions like what was confusing or what could we have done to make it more clear, because that could really shape your solution going forward. Remember, the goal of prototyping is to create a quick and affordable way to test your proposed solution. We will be going through this in more detail again tomorrow, but just keep in mind that nearly any solution can be prototyped, and that if you are creating a digital solution, which probably a lot of thoughtbots clients would be doing, you don't need to create an entire app. You don't need to design every aspect in a single day. You're just looking to build one singular flow around the core functionality that you're trying to test. So keep that in mind for our next exercise. And when you're ready, move on to that video.